Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here for this Dialogue for Action. It's a facilitator training for our All-America City finalists, as well as some other folks who are joining us. My name is Rebecca Trout, and I am with the National Civic League. I am the program director of our All-America City Awards, and I'm just thrilled to have all of you familiar faces and unfamiliar faces here with us today. We have a great lineup of panelists. And without further ado, I'm just going to have introduce Stacey Wegley from Community Initiatives to get us going, because we have a full program. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you as our partners at National Civic League and each of the communities from across the country. As Rebecca said, I'm Stacey, and I'm with Community Initiatives and Community Commons, and joining you today from Cincinnati, Ohio. As we begin, I'd love for each of you to add your voices to the room through the chat and share your name, your organization, and perhaps add what community you're from, as we have folks from all over today for a variety of geographies and regions. We anticipate that as you scroll down and look at the list that you'll see some old friends, and I hope you'll even take the opportunity perhaps to virtually introduce yourself to someone new through the private chat. My colleagues Elizabeth and Monty are here with me today from Community Initiatives, as well as my colleague Erin from the Institute for People, Place, and Possibility. They'll be sharing space with you in the chat room, hoping to answer questions and lift up your ideas and comments. As we go forward, really encourage you to drop in, really even as we start, what you're hoping to learn today, and continue to add questions as you hear things of interest or areas you'd like us to follow up on, and give one of the panelists, again, additional time to explain further perhaps. Also, as we go forward, if you use resources around dialogue or other relevant materials that you found helpful, please add those to the chat, and we'll look forward to adding those to what we would anticipate to share as a part of our follow-up today. So again, just grateful to be here. On our agenda, or really sort of our time ahead, we've got 90 minutes together, and the first 60 minutes will really be talking with and learning from a tremendous group of panelists who are all working in their own way to strengthen community and build civic muscle through the use of dialogue. We'll round out our first hour together talking a little bit more about the role of the facilitator in the dialogue, and share a host of resources and tools that you can take and put into action in your communities. And then the final 30 minutes will really provide an opportunity to break out into smaller groups and to dialogue and connect with one another. So looking forward to our time together today. Next slide, please. So why community dialogue, or why dialogue? It really is an opportunity to help build connection, strengthen our sense of belonging. And the act of participating in dialogue really, in of itself, is an end, the opportunity to sit in conversation, to listen, to find and create shared meaning. And if desired, can be a pathway for moving forward together in action. The practice of community dialogue you'll hear about and see is occurring around the country, from Alabama up north to Wisconsin and clear across to the state of Washington, where folks are inviting community members to sit in dialogue with one another. Some are talking about mental health, others about the impacts of COVID-19, and others yet are really leaning into some dialogue around racial justice. And you'll get to hear about some of that today. But no matter the topic for community dialogue, we really want to share what's true for ourselves, listen deeply to what's true for others, and really take the opportunity to find and discover what we have in common. really would love to jump over. I'm super excited about the conversation ahead and grateful to each of our panelists for taking time today to share some of their journey about using dialogue as well as supporting the work of dialogue across the country. We have with us today Joan Blades, Rayon Brown, Kristen Hansen, and Parisa Parsa. And I'd love to invite each of them to take the first couple of minutes to introduce themselves, their organizations, and just a bit about their work. And perhaps we'll go in that order, kind of in alphabetical order, get us started today. Joan, if you get us started off.
Okay, well, living room conversations are something I've been doing for 10 years now. And we have an open source project where communities all around the country are able to have small 6-person structured conversations. It was originally 2 friends with different viewpoints, each invite 2 friends for a self-facilitated conversation, because the guides we have are the container. And we have faith communities and libraries and individuals all having these conversations, and some have them monthly, and they get deeper and deeper. We have over 100 guides. And right now we have a whole COVID page with these wonderful deep conversations. And we have just put up a race and equity conversations page. But all the conversation topics you've been talking about, plus another 99 are up there at Living Room Conversations for people to download and have. And I've been noticing the pictures being shared are pictures in person, which people love. But we've been doing video conversations for years also, and had research done last year that revealed that our video conversations are powerful in the same way that our in-person conversations are, so we've been scrambling this year to help all these in-person communities transition to online. And it has, one of the things among many is to have political differences bridged with these conversations. And now we can talk to our friends in any part of the country that has good connection. And it's really a wonderful practice. I hope you try it. And I hope you try it with lots of people and then do it. It's a practice. Our faith communities in particular have been teaching us wonderful things. So I look forward to talking more about this, and we'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you. My name is Rayon Brown, and I'm from Fox Valley Tech. I reside in Appleton, Wisconsin. For those of you who might not be familiar with where that is, it's about 30 minutes away from the best football team on earth, the Green Bay Packers. I am a co-chair for Imagine Fox Cities. Our group is focusing on well-being for the people of our community, and to make sure that all people, no matter who you are, where you're from, feel as if you belong. I'm involved with Imagine Fox Cities comprehensively, but work on one of the subcommittees that have worked diligently to create some dialogue around racism and anti-racism in light of the most recent events that have been going forward. And, when we really look at dialogue, we want to make sure that we are having dialogue, because dialogue eliminates all the structural powers that comes, with other types of conversation, and it put people together in whatever format or modality that is being happening in a space where they can be authentic and be genuine and have conversations that sometimes might be new, might be difficult, but it provides an opportunity for every individual to listen and to learn, and hopefully be comfortable to take action and work collaboratively to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard and respected at the same time. So we focus on these dialogues, and the mission of these dialogues from a community level is to make sure that we canvass the entire community and making sure that those who have additional influences over where they sit on a daily basis. We're taking these dialogues into our workplace, into our homes, and into the areas that we socialize to advance the overall mission of Imagine Fox Cities. And I'll pause there. And I'm also excited and I'm honored to be here to share, and I'm excited to share more later on today as well.
I think I was next in the photo lineup, so I'll go ahead and go. My name is Kristen Hansen. I run a nonprofit called Civic Health Project, but what I'll be talking to you about today is one of the specific projects we're working on within that organization called All Sides Connect. I wanted to start, though, by just highlighting connection points to the two prior speakers. Rayon, you may not know that we are deeply connected, but actually my folks live in Appleton, and my dad taught at UW Fox Valley for about 25 years. So big shout out to Appleton. And the other person I feel very deeply connected with on this panel is Joan. Joan has been a mentor and inspiration to me in so many ways as I've entered into dialogue work myself. And I just want to do a big shout out and ringing endorsement of Living Room Conversations as this amazing open source resource available to all of you to spark dialogue within your communities. You have the most incredible toolkit available to you there right online, not only the conversation guides, but all of the guidance that goes around it for how to have productive conversations, dialogue that yields great outcomes. And so I just can't urge you enough to take advantage of that. A lot of my work over the past year plus has centered on how to reduce some of the friction involved in making dialogue happen. Now, working on that friction started before COVID, and you could probably imagine what some of the friction points are. Our learning and trying to address some of the friction points for organizations like Living Room Conversations are around not this question of whether people want to get together and have dialogue. By and large, most people are pretty open to that idea. It's the challenges of forming the right groups of people to make the right kind of dialogue happen, how you get those people matched and organized together, how you schedule dialogue events to happen. All of these are major friction points that constrain our ability to scale and accelerate the kinds of dialogues that we want to have happen, let alone the insights that you want to extract out of those conversations. And Paris in a moment is going to talk more about how you extract insights. But as far as the conversation itself, a lot of the work we do, and you can take a look at All Sides Connect, centers on how we reduce these friction points, use technology, and technology really can be our friend in this process. Joan already made the point that studies show that connecting over video can be as powerful or as close to as powerful as if you're in the same room with somebody. I've worked with video for 25 years. I really believe that to be true. I love to advise people on how to make that true, how to make video conferencing a powerful medium. So that's part of it. But it is also everything that you wrap around it to make the identification of dialogue groups or teams, the matching of people into those groups, the scheduling of those, how you make that possible. And so I think that understanding the role that technology could play to make this work for you is a way that I hope to contribute in this panel and beyond for anyone who wants to talk further. So I'll leave it there and go to Prisa. I think I'm handing the baton to you.
Great, thanks, Kristen. It's a real privilege to be with you all today, and especially with the fellow panel members, all of whom have similar past connections with or current connections with, so it's really fun to be here. I am Parisa Parsa. I'm CEO of Cortico, which is a nonprofit that works in cooperation with the MIT Media Lab. And our sole programmatic focus has been building a local voices network. So our mission is to engage human listening and machine learning to amplify underheard voices and create a public sphere that is fueled by curiosity, respect, and trust. We were founded by a group of folks who were doing a lot of analysis on data coming out of both Twitter and talk radio in the lead up to the 2016 elections, and saw in real time how they were the first ones to document the well-known phenomenon now that fake news travels about 7 times faster than true news, and wanted to figure out how to do something more than study it after the fact, but rather make the connection between the understandings that we can get from social media and the counterbalance of real people in conversation that deepens and offers nuance and greater understanding to the multiple perspectives, the multiple identities we all hold, to create a healthier public sphere. I came from another dialogue organization that had practiced gathering people across deep divides for decades. And one of the biggest concerns was, how do we saw these powerful experiences happening in person in the small groups that we gathered for dialogue, but getting the word out about the impact of that on an individual, understanding what the dynamics of the conversation were that really led to the powerful change in perspective and different pro-social behaviors and community as a result of being seen and understood and really heard by other folks, was something that was always a real challenge to prove and to evidence. And so the machine learning part is that we gather small groups of folks for facilitated conversations with a structured conversation guide, not too different from the living room conversations or any of the guides that other folks are using, that is then recorded, transcribed, and uploaded to a data visualization platform that lets you see and hear the conversations, lets all participants have access to the conversations they participated in and those in their local community, and then allows them to highlight parts that are particularly important to them. We also share that with media partners in local areas so that they can get access to those local voices. One of the big issues we're trying to solve for is the news deserts problem and the lack of local reporters who can, local beat reporters who can understand what's happening viscerally and very directly within the community. And so fueling them with better information, we hope can lead to putting more pressure on politicians and policymakers and just informing policymakers. We're actually finding a lot of traction with policymakers and public sector organizations that are already commissioned to listen to the community and to make sense of that for future community planning. So that's our sort of arc of change, and we are delighted to be continuing to iterate. The Local Voices Network is only 1.5 years old, so we're learning from and with folks in the field all the time how to improve the technology, improve the practices, and how we can partner together to share and create the positive effects of dialogue as much as possible.
Thanks all. So appreciate you getting us started, and you've each in your own way started to talk a little bit about some of the conditions or some of what dialogue looks like. And I was wondering, as we get started, a lot of folks talk about sort of being in conversation, being in dialogue. We gather information or host community conversation in the form of focus groups. And I was wondering, Parisa, if you might get us started by helping to discern perhaps a little bit of the difference between those as we dive deeper in talking about dialogue.
Thanks, Stacy. It's a great question because dialogue, depending on where you sit and different institutional and experiences we've had, dialogue sometimes gets a bad rap because it's often the name used for something that looks a little closer to indoctrination, gathering people for a conversation when some big event has happened, and then doing actually an education process about how to think about that thing. That's institutionally a lot of the time. It's also used as a way to say something was done, gathering people for dialogue and then not actually seeing any consequences. What I mean by dialogue, I think what we all mean by dialogue, is that practice of engaging with each other relationally so that we can share and understand the many levels of experience that we bring to an issue, an experience, a community concern. And unpack some of the complexity of it relieved of our need to represent a particular group of people or speak for all of the facts and figures related to an issue. All of those things are important. But in a true dialogue, there's an opportunity to deepen in self-understanding as we share our stories with others, and to deepen in our ability to hold the complexity of others' experiences as we uncover our own.
Thanks for that. And wondering if Joan or others may be interested in being additive there. What has been some of your experience with dialogue?
Well, for my experience is, that we tend to think we're far more different than we are, that people we really think we're not comfortable with. Most people have good intent, and when we're separated, we don't know that. And I'm just, constantly kind of amazed by how it's this recipe for sitting down and just deeply listening to each other is so impactful. You don't actually have to find working common ground so much as that you share values. And that changes everything. It changes our ability to hear each other. And, there's one of our evangelical communities had been having, regular living room conversations, and things blew up on Facebook around guns. And so they shifted their conversation to the guns and responsibility conversation that month. And, the stories that came back from that, it was very important at those small tables, but then it also filtered out into the people's lives in really profound ways. So this can be about, individual transformation as well as community and it all starts with the individual. But it's incredibly gratifying how powerful the simple practice of listening is.
Yeah.
May I add, I think that all of you on this, attending this panel will find that as you explore resources that are out there to support dialogue, whether it is the Library on Living Room Conversations or other dialogue toolkits. I think there's even one on the National Civic League website, if I'm not mistaken. You'll find that many of them follow a similar shape. There's a shape to a dialogue, and some of the common attributes that you will find that practitioners and organizations have found to be successful in driving the kinds of outcomes that you're seeking out of dialogue include things like laying down a set of norms, guardrails, agreements before you enter into the conversation, so everybody kind of understands what the practice of dialogue looks like. So that might be the first thing you do is review those agreements, those norms. Then you need to warm up a little bit. So there might be ice-breaking, warm-up type questions that allow people to start opening up and establishing a sense of trust. And this can happen relatively quickly. This can happen within, a 1-hour scheduled conversation by following the shape or structure. From that warm-up, you move into the depth of the topic. What is it you're confronting in terms of issues or conflicts that may be going on in your community, country, world? You're ready for that now. And to really put a bow on it, at the end, there's a concluding piece to a dialogue where you reflect. You reflect, you appreciate, you think about and share what the conversation or the dialogue experience has meant for you. So agreements, icebreakers, topic, reflection, these are things that you'll typically see. I don't want to say it's a recipe, but these are common attributes of good dialogue experiences.
And I'll just add to that. That's powerful. I'll add to understand that from my experience and what we use dialogue to do is to create a space where diverse people, both from a thinking perspective and a representational from an ethnic background, can have a safe space in order to engage in conversation. That promotes forward momentum and forward thinking activities, right? When we really look at dialogue, we look at dialogue as an opportunity to make sure that all voices are being heard and all voices are being included, and not just being added at the last minute, but to provide an opportunity for those that we're trying to help and those that we're trying to make a difference for, have initial input into what will be shaping their future. Oftentimes when people engage in other forms of communication, they add the people that we're trying to help at the last minute, and dialogue creates an opportunity for us to listen and learn from those that are experiencing these things. And for us, when we look at the dialogues that we have created lately around race and racism and anti-racism, it gives us an opportunity to sit and to listen to those who are impacted the most without being judgmental or without reflecting everything on ourselves, but just to understand an individual's truth and to then be comfortable to use that truth to shape whatever activities we do going forward.
Ran, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, it's just going to tack on to the end of your comment that in thinking about getting both the thought and the representational diversity that you're seeking, which could be in a lot of different directions. It could be race, gender, age, faith, secular, military, civilian, many different dimensions of representation, and it can vary by topic. But thinking about representation takes you the further step of thinking about access, making dialogue accessible. What is the process by which people enter into conversation? And if it's a physical event, can they get there? If it's an online event, do they have the technology? These are really important questions to understand as you're driving for total inclusion. Beyond those friction points I'd already mentioned, just the basic matching and scheduling, but you get into these deeper questions of access. Sorry, Prisa, go ahead.
And what's so exciting about All Sides Connect is it really reduces the friction, has made it available to a lot more people.
Yeah,
because,
that's the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's succeeded and getting better all the time.
I agree with that because, when dialogue is done, and it's done with an equitable lens, then we think about all of those things and making sure that everyone is having an opportunity to be involved at all levels of the engagement.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we have people all around the country, millions and millions of people that are now comfortable with video when they weren't 5 months ago. So there's some profound shifts that have happened.
Yeah.
And looking forward how to, kind of this, where we've been trying to overcome differences. In some cases, we're now trying to take care of people too, because there's a lot of loss of connection that has happened at this time. And so looking at those needs and filling them and helping people be able to take care is really valuable.
Yeah. Absolutely. Shifting gears just a little bit, I think that in terms of thinking in terms of civic engagement with dialogue, the impact of the polarization in the larger public sphere has been that folks feel like in order to show up and talk about an issue or a topic that might be of great concern to them, they might have a ton of opinions about, they have to be an expert, they have to be willing to go to the mat, they have to be, sort of in this fighting stance. And one of the things that accelerates is actually people avoiding conversations, avoiding showing up for community forums and other places where their voices might make a real difference, especially folks who are not what, I don't know if you all use this term, but we often do, the professional citizens, right? The folks who are the first to comment on every article online and the first to show up at every town meeting and, get the mic and hold it. So getting a greater range of voices participating in civic dialogue is part of what I think all of our processes really allow for, because those agreements that Kristen mentioned are part of the sort of counterbalance to polarization by helping people trust and understand what's going to happen, creating a safe container for the conversation that's to come, allowing people to ask questions about those agreements and navigate what shared meaning around what behavior will be tolerated in a space. And then it enables us to kind of come out of that fight or flight or freeze stance and then tap into, and the neurobiology is really clear on this, right? When we feel threatened, there are actual huge parts of the brain that shut down completely. And the parts that shut down first are the capacity for creativity and curiosity, right? So what good dialogue does is opens us back up to the creativity and curiosity so that we can really create that listening space that Joan was talking about, and also get curious about each other's experience, especially when it's different than our own, right? That's something I've never heard before. I never knew the pride that gun owners from rural areas have in the generations long practice of protecting, creating food for their families and being able to, live off the land. There are just all kinds of things that come up that are insights that we get. Me as an urban person who was never around gun owners, like that was a brand new realization for me in a gun dialogue, and profoundly changed the way that I could take in information that was more stereotypical about folks who advocate for gun rights. So I think there are these transformations that occur all the time, and we're told that people who don't think like we do, are jerks, that they're disruptive, that they're disrespectful, that they're terrible people. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again in dialogues that get to this place is, well, even when they're curated very carefully for that ideological diversity or experiential diversity, is, well, that was a great experience, but where were all the difficult people? Like, we were hiding the difficult people in the corner, right? We're all difficult people when we're in that defended space. But when we have the opportunity to come out of that space, we get to be known for all of who we are. And that's what this is about.
And All Sides Connect was conceived of because about 4 or 5 years ago, people stopped being willing to ask a friend or colleague or neighbor to have a conversation about politics. That's where we got to. We've been modeling such bad behavior around talking across differences that people have decided they're not going to do it. So this is a really important, collective project to get people talking again, because it's just getting worse as we fail to be in connection with each other.
And it may require some pre-work, because at the opposite end of the spectrum of the professional citizen, who's probably going to show up to your dialogue, is the other end of the spectrum. Who do you want to have in that conversation who is definitely not planning to come? And how do you change their mind? You're not going to get the representation and the diversity you're looking for if you haven't accounted for the headwinds and tailwinds that are going to make people either want to show up or not want to show up. And what communications might be needed at the front end of a dialogue experience, event, program you're planning that will alleviate people's fears, concerns, resistance factors, and convince them that they're going to go into a positive rather than a negative experience, because otherwise you'll never overcome the imbalances. And this is something that people who work in dialogue struggle with broadly, is just ensuring that everyone feels equally invited to the table and that the table will be an enjoyable place to sit.
Ryan, I'm wondering if you might take a moment to talk a little bit about your on the ground work in Imagine Fox Cities. With how did you all make that happen? How did you bring a variety of voices and invite a variety of voices to that table, or those tables?
And when we look at that, we were focusing on how do we get those that might be the passive participators engaged in dialogue that often won't be the first to show up, but might have a need for being heard. And even when they're at the table, what do we do in order to make sure that their voices are just as powerful as those who are often comfortable or willing to speak up first? That is where a lot of our strategies came in. And I talk about John Powell a lot, and talk about targeted universalism, and talk about equity, and how we incorporate some of these strategies and concepts into the things that we do, where we have to create targeted efforts in order to reach those solutions. And when you understand that a group of young African-American males will not be the first to show up in a community that's predominantly white to share their experience, we have to find ways and identify strategies in order to engage with that population. So we were looking at each population and mapping out our community for its true identity, and making sure that we're adding equal value to those that we haven't heard from yet, and not just relying on them finding us, but how were we going out there to find them. So we were pretty strategic in scheduling our conversations and scheduling the dialogues that we have, where we find leaders, and not leaders with titles or organizational leaders, but community leaders who can then be influencers to bring their friends or to bring individuals in a room to have these conversations, but also to look at it from a holistic approach to make sure that we find a way to get them in the room and to keep them in the room, and make sure that once they come in that room, they see someone that look like them, facilitating these conversations, because representation is important when we have these type of dialogue and we provide these targeted opportunities. On the back end of some of the conversations that we're having now, we're taking a multiple approach with the conversations around race, racism, and anti-racism, where we are individually going in and having conversations with our friends and kind of have it being a train the trainer or influence the influencer to go out and continue these conversations to make sure that we galvanize our community, but then also make it lucrative and exciting enough for people to want to go in and to learn something. So we figure out a way to get these dialogues out there and in most cases, what we would say is like make a big deal out of it, right? Market it, promote it, capitalize on momentum, and then go in and start these conversations and move throughout the process to ensure that people are hearing us. Invite and include people from areas that people go to. One of the things that we did was connect with our local barbershops, right? We know that there are a lot of people that we need to hear from. So why not connect with those barbers? Those barbers have people's ears, they have people's attention on a regular basis. So we have a group of people that we connect with that have barbershop conversations, right? Community leaders help and drive those conversations. Go into our school system and identify those specific programs within our school systems and train the youth within the school systems in order to have these dialogues. And we were pretty successful, and we continue to be successful with those targeted efforts to engage, what we classify as the passive participators throughout the Fox cities.
Thanks, Rayon. And Erin, sort of reaching out to you to see what questions may be coming up in the chat, or invite folks to add questions to the chat.
Yeah, we've got a question from Monica. How do we dialogue through rhetoric?
There are panelists that would like to jump into that.
Would it be possible for Monica to provide a bit more color on that question regarding rhetoric? I'm personally not sure if that's rhetoric being used in a positive way or a negative way as a term. Maybe others understand the question more clearly. Monica, are you willing to either chat or speak out a more detailed question?
I would also say Parisa's response, if it's the way she's interpreting it, is a perfect response.
Yeah.
That we invite people to share not positions, but their personal experience that's led them to think, to believe as they do. This allows openings for compassion and empathy, even when we arrive at different positions. So if someone is bringing their rehearsed rhetoric, we ask them to tell us a story about an experience that illustrates how they came to that belief. A very different conversation ensues. The framing of the dialogue question is critical to this process, as it is support from the agreement. So
and I see that Monica's popped on too.
Because she did a perfect reply. The round two questions in conversations, for living room conversations, are trying to achieve that always, is to get people to their personal relationship with whatever the topic is. So talking points, they put us into our, kind of political argument space, and people stop listening.
And for us, with Imagine Fox Cities, that's exactly what we do, right? Is having people share their own authentic and personal experiences. And that goes back to the structure of the dialogue and how you create the questions, right? And how do you create the framing of the dialogue to make sure that it eliminates, falsehoods and, and rhetoric that someone might come in with pre-planned. And when you ask about a personal experience and, and have someone share their authentic truth in these dialogues, it eliminates that for the most part.
Monica's question brings up another important meta aspect to conducting dialogues. This is another part of the how-to that I think this panel is largely about, which is thinking about how to ensure best behaviors, the kinds of behaviors that you're looking for within a dialogue from all of its participants, and how active or passive will your facilitation approach be. And we talked about conversation agreements as one really powerful way to set some norms and guardrails as people enter into a dialogue. But some will adhere to those guidelines quite readily, others might have trouble with them. And so thinking through your game plan as far as whether each dialogue group or circle will be hosted or facilitated by someone with specific skills, or whether documentation is enough, whether there's pre-training that needs to happen, ask those questions. Like how will we make sure that when this group that we've so carefully assembled, how will we ensure that folks are kind of, playing by the rules?
Thanks, Kristen and all. I appreciate you responding and lifting up Monica's question. Wondering a little bit about how we think about the use of dialogue in building civic muscle. And several of you have touched on this in a variety of ways, and I'm wondering through each of your platforms and the many dialogues you've participated in or help facilitate yourselves, or what are you hearing? What are you seeing in the way of how dialogue is building civic muscle?
Maybe I could start there and just jump on your question by saying I think one way that dialogue builds civic muscle is when we start early with people and start developing these skills as an important part of the that broader arc of social and emotional learning that we're hoping our young people will be able to incorporate and adopt to be successful in their lives. Whether you call it dialogue or civil discourse, a really important part of building civic muscle and the right skills needed in people for civic engagement is learning and practicing how to connect, listen, respect, understand across distance and difference. And so I would contend that a lot of our work has been in schools. We work specifically with students in classrooms at the middle and high school level, where we think that's a really important starting point for inculcating these skills and muscles, if you will. However, so 2 points as it relates to community. The first is that developing and practicing these skills is just important for all of us as adults, as it is for young people, but also thinking about representational diversity within your communities as also having a strong age dimension. Living Room Conversations does a lot of work and emphasizes intergenerational dialogue and getting a breadth of perspectives from within your community. Don't forget the age axis as an important part of that, and how, whether it's younger people modeling for older or vice versa, we can learn across generations and build those civic muscles together.
Thanks for getting us started there. Others?
There's so many kinds of civic muscle. One of the things I discovered in one of my living room conversations that was actually in my living room a number of years ago was that we were on completely the same page when I hosted a conversation with the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. I also am a co-founder of MoveOn.org. So it was like, okay, this is kind of his friends, my friends. And we were amazed to find that we had a lot of common ground around the issue of criminal justice issues, too many people in prison, war on drugs not a success, got to use evidence-based practices. And that created a foundation for us and others to work collaboratively on something that was deeply wrong with our society. Now, I have been learning ever since then how resistant our systems are to change. And, you know, even when you're in agreement, which is, you know, a place where we need more civic muscle to continue this process, but working across with people that are unlikely allies definitely gives you some additional impact. And you have everyone's best ideas in the room.
Thanks, Joan. And Parisa, one of the things I find super interesting about your platform as well is that ability to bring voices across the rooms from different communities. Might you share a little bit about what you all are learning there?
Sure. What Stacy's referring to is that the recorded nature of our conversations and the ability for folks to highlight significant things to them in the conversation also allows us to take those highlights from one conversation and play them into another conversation, so that even if we don't have ideological diversity in a given room, we can bring in a different perspective and invite people to respond to that perspective as if that person is in the room with them. So we give them just a little bit of information from what the person shared earlier in the conversation and say, now we're going to invite this person into the room and hear a little bit of their story and just want to get your response. And one of the things that that does is also helps, like, we can think that our small group that we're connected with is this unique and special group of people that can never be recreated, right? That's how profound these experiences of the dialogues are and how rare they are in the span of many of our experiences in civic and community life these days. It's really, it helps us get a more expansive sense of what's possible to hear that intimate conversation from another conversation that happened and feel connected to this larger network, right? It's kind of the way social media can feel like this overwhelmingly, you know, over-informed place where there's so much data we don't know how to make sense of it, but our little experiences couldn't possibly compare, and trying to counteract that by saying, no, actually, the more we have of these, the more we meet that yearning to know and be known in community, the more we can actually create a counter narrative to the one that tells us we have to be divided and helps us understand how to do that kind of problem solving together that we don't get enough time or space for in the way the world is constructed right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. Brianne, I know as you all have been sitting in dialogue again across your community, you named, I believe, 81 or so community conversations that you all have hosted. Can you speak a little bit to how you all are taking the relationships and the civic muscle perhaps that's growing as a result of those dialogues and looking to the next steps, how you all may take action together?
Yes. So we've heard a lot of things when we engage in our dialogue, and you know, one of the things that we heard was that we have a strong sense of community, but not everyone was feeling it within the Fox cities. And sometimes that was because of the power structure or the inequities that exist between certain groups. One of the first things that we learn is that when you start to have dialogue and you're trying to build civic muscle, sometimes when you hear something, you have to be comfortable to relinquish your power and move out of the way and allow others who are impacted to lead and to guide the direction that we take. We cannot create a organizational structure around civic muscle and community momentum. We have to empower our community leaders, and sometimes mostly our informal community members, to continue to grow and develop. And the more they grow and develop, the more that we see where our community will grow and develop. One of the conversations that we had, it was with a group of students, and one of the students said to us that the student's success is our community success. So leaders within our community have to be comfortable to lead from the front, to lead from the side, or to lead from behind. And sometimes we also have to be comfortable to step out of the way and listen and learn and let others lead. So we have been taking all of that into consideration as we continue to build and going forward, and creating opportunities for those to bring information to us is a critical part of our success. And making sure that when we're doing that, we continue to listen and be flexible enough, to make the changes that we need. Another powerful thing that we heard and we have been listening to throughout all of the dialogues is that, specifically for people of color, for our Black and Brown people within our communities, they're also tired of just being invited to the table. They want an opportunity to own these tables that they're sitting at a lot of times. So as a community group, we start focusing on creating opportunities to advance these opportunities for individuals that have potential to start their own initiatives and to live under our umbrella until they're able to stand on their own, right? And to be supportive and continue, to push or to educate or to guide when necessary. Imagine Fox Cities have, taken a greater look at what we hope to do, and not just looking for tomorrow or the next day. I have the pleasure of working with Walt Ruglin in this, who is a visionary, and he talks about not just for our children, but what are we doing for our children, children's children, and how do we impact that? And when we make a decision today, how do we evaluate those decisions? And we continue to do that by engaging with all the cross sections of our community, and making sure that those influencers or the business leaders within our communities are also comfortable to sit at a table where they normally wouldn't sit. And that builds, that instills a sense of pride within our community, and make people, make people know that they're not, quote unquote, being studied, they're being listened to. And importantly enough is to take action. I think someone mentioned this earlier in one of the pre-introductions, that you can continue to have dialogue, but when we truly start to see civic muscle increasing is when we're comfortable to take action on what we're hearing. And those are some of the things that we're doing in the Fox Cities, and continue to react to what's taking place, and to be, what we would like to say, we want to be responsive, but we also want to be relevant to our community and our community needs.
Thanks, Ryan. And I know we're getting close to our 60 minutes together here, and was wondering if I might invite, in the sort of same order perhaps that you all spoken to the room today, beginning with Joan, just perhaps a piece of advice from something you've learned for those in the room who are interested in hosting or facilitating or starting a dialogue process in their community. Joan, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. I think one of the things I've learned in the last couple of years is that it's great to have a living room conversation, and creating an opportunity to have it be an ongoing process of a practice rather than a one-off really deepens the work, because that's, I think, where we ultimately want to go. And it's really exciting that at this time, with this new comfort with video, that we can start building community locally, but also recognize that our lack of national community, it's like I look at this and go, wow, we could have sister cities happening around here. We could do some amazing work if the people on this call went, let's do it locally and then let's do it nationally. So that's my invitation, and an invitation to let us know about it if so, because that's the way we amplify and increase the energy.
Rayon, what might you lift up?
What I would probably leave with is to say that the more we dialogue, we start to build community, because when we build dialogue around the concepts that we discussed earlier, to understand that people are bringing their authentic selves and bringing their individual stories, we need to know that the more we have and share individual stories, the stronger our connections get as a community. And individual stories build community stories. And if we continue to build and keep the momentum going on our community stories, we will make change, because it will give people an opportunity to speak their truth and for their voices to be heard on a regular basis. And yeah, knowing that the dialogues will change, and when the dialogues change, or the topics of the dialogues change, our structures have to be flexible enough. I've learned a significant amount of experiences that people who look like me experience within my community, and their experiences are sometimes a little bit different than mine. But then when we get to those the intersections and intersectionalities of some of the things that we all experience, we realize that we have more in common than we have different, right? And dialogue bring that out and bring people together and help us celebrate each other and learn about each other. Education, I'm partial to it. If you're not seeing my logo, I think dialogue provides us that opportunity to educate each other about who we are. And the more we learn about ourselves collectively, the better it is for us to live together and to continue to work together to build a stronger community around all instances.
Kristen, what would you add for us today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my advice would be leverage this team. I'm sure that you'll have or already have the contact information for all of us here on the panel. I just want to really invite individual outreach to any of us, because there is a definite acceleration of this dialogue work. It's happening for all sorts of reasons. And we've touched on the fact that the increasing adoption of video as an acceptable medium, and sometimes an improvement on in-person because of how it can accelerate the ability to bring people together. There's just so much happening, and each of us has a vantage point that is at least national, if not global, in terms of understanding who is doing this kind of work and who is moving the ball forward quickly. So we can be part of best practice sharing. We can put you in touch with other people doing this work at the community level. And you, of course, are building a great network of folks to do that as well. But take advantage of us, and please reach out and let us know. I know my esteemed colleagues on the panel don't mind me inviting this on their behalf. We would love to help.
Yeah, I'll echo what Kristen said. That was going to be my first piece of advice. Just know that there are lots of resources at the ready and very happily shared. And also just want to say that one of the things, to the polarization of the public sphere, that extends to public meetings often. And I know that public officials often dread town halls or other kinds of public meetings that are required by law to be open to everyone. And that I think that we've been poorly resourced with tools to have those meetings go better. And I think some dialogue component in those public meetings can help people tap into that creativity, that community problem solving, that solutions oriented stuff that can keep them from being so adversarial, so toxic, and from perpetuating those same things that really aren't serving anyone, and keep the wrong conversations at the center, and don't allow for the kind of complex thinking and the breadth of community involvement that could actually make a difference for many of our municipalities. So I would leave you with that hopeful thing that you don't need to be locked into only one format for public meetings. And I think all of us would be happy to help with reimagining some of that work.
Thanks so much, Grayson. Thanks to all of our panelists. as we close out our sort of first 60 minutes today, know that we will be able to share the slide deck. Baked within that slide deck is links to each of the team members and organizations that have been shared today, and with the addition of a handful of others. We'll look forward to adding a couple of the resources that folks chatted in today. So again, just really appreciate our time together during this first 60 minutes. Now, for anyone who has the ability to stay on with us, look forward to the opportunity to being in dialogue with each of you. Might invite my colleague Monty Roulier to set us up and prepare us to spend a bit of time together. Monty, perhaps if you're speaking, you may be on mute, so checking in.
First, thank you. First thing to learn about online dialogues, make sure you're off mute. Just fabulous panel. Thank you so much for the panelists, Joan, Rayon, Kristen, Parisa, Rayon. As I say, I learned so much. I try to practice dialogue and do on a regular basis, but there's lots to learn. And well, I think we heard that it takes a lot of intentionality. There's this also underlying kind of simplicity and power that comes with dialogue that, you know, when we create the right structures that start to come pretty naturally. And I think also the importance of being able to practice and experience dialogue for all of us. And so that's what we wanted to give folks an opportunity to do here over the next, say, 12 minutes or so, is to invite you into a dialogue around a couple of questions that you're seeing on the screen, and they will be chatted in as well. So you can take these dialogue questions wherever you will with your small group. You'll be in groups of probably anywhere between 3 and 5 folks into a Zoom room. And again, what is the most significant way that COVID and the social movement for racial justice, how is that impacting kind of your realities, your family relationships, your working life? What is this kind of moment in time that that's been alluded to? How's that what's been revealing about your community or your neighborhood, the strengths and the challenges, and perhaps, you know, who's being left out, who's most vulnerable and isolated. So invite you to do some thinking about that. And then finally, what gives you hope? So this is a really, as Joan started off talking about some of the self-guided dialogues, that's what this is. And so we're gonna you'll magically move into a room with some others, and you can introduce yourselves to one another as you answer that first question. And those questions, again, you can find in the chat. So what's most significant, what's it revealing, and what gives you hope? And we'll meet you back in just a little bit.